We are almost at the end of October, so I figured what better time to actually do my quarter three rundown. I can't believe we are nearly in November already. Hey everyone, it's Ray and welcome to my little bookish corner of the world that is forever changing, and third time is a charm, at least I hope so, because seriously, I have tried to record this video so many times now, and I tried last week before I came down with the lurgy from hell, and I attempted to record it in the second week of the month and then got interrupted by a lot of birthday events. It was my mum's 70th and it was my brother-in-law's birthday, and seriously, if anybody else could have a birthday in October, I think they would. I am going to be talking about the books that I read, my favourite, my not so favourite, for July through September. And I figured now was as good a time as any. I'm going to take a look at where I am in my targets. Have I hit my goals? And what I'm going to do for the next few months, because we really are heading into we are in the last quarter of the year, and I think it's been going pretty well. Anyway, let's get started with July, which was a pretty good month if I do say so myself. I read a total of 13 books, and that was 4,993 pages. I think this was helped by the fact that I felt quite enthused about a lot of the books that were coming out, and my favourite read, that is probably going to end up being my favourite read of the entire year, came out in that month. It was supposed to be our book for August. It was our book club book for August, but I couldn't hold back in reading it. So I just made lots of notes, reread parts of it just before we had our book club meeting, and enjoyed the wonder that was Costanza Casati's Babylonia, which is just behind me here with its pretty sister. I got the special edition. Doesn't matter what it looks like, really, though it is very pretty to stare at on the shelf. The story itself was incredibly well told. It is a combination of mythology and historical fact, sort of changed slightly to make it more palatable, but also to give us a good insight into a part of history that probably many people aren't aware of. It is the story of Queen Semiramis, who was the first and only queen in Babylonia, and the story of how she got to where she was from the impoverished beginnings that she had. Another fantastic book from Costanza Casati, who produced or created my favourite novel of 2023, Clytemnestra. And I think this is probably, unless something incredible comes along, and I mean really and truly incredible, Babylonia is going to stay in the number one spot for the rest of the year. And it really will have to be something incredible that beats it, because I've spoken with quite a few of my friends. As I said, it was a book club book, and they actually told me that they preferred Babylonia to Clytemnestra, but I think I've got a very, very strong connection to the book of Clytemnestra, purely because the story of the Trojan War and everything went on behind the scenes of the Trojan War, according to the myths of Hesiod and Homer, have always fascinated me. And I'm talking about from when I was about 6 or 7 years old. So I have a very strong connection with that particular story. Of course, where there is a high, there has to be a low. Well, there doesn't have to be, but there is a low in this case, and it's actually 2 books. This is the third, July was the third month that I was doing my 1-star Goodreads review jar picks, and I picked 3 books, one of which was my least favourite, or one of my least favourite books in July, and that was Fair Rosaline by Natasha Solomons. I have to be honest, I am not a huge fan of Romeo and Juliet. It's one of my least favourite plays by Shakespeare, and always has been ever since school. It was a compulsory study for GCSEs back in the late 80s, early 90s, so we studied it constantly. Felt like it was an eternal study session with Romeo and Juliet, and I never enjoyed the story, so it was always onto a bit of a loser. However, this book was just, it made everything about Romeo, it twisted it and turned it on its head, which is not a bad thing because it's not a great play anyway. And it was actually a story that he took, as he did many, but it also lacked so much. Rosaline was made out to be a heroine. She merged, and she was only a couple of lines, a couple of throwaway lines in the play itself. And she was made out to be this girl who essentially busted a trafficking ring that was headlined by many people that were in power in Verona. Romeo, who was the one who wooed the girls into the web, and the friar who married Romeo and Juliet. It was twisted, it was dark, and normally I would enjoy that. I just felt that it was unnecessary. If you're going to write a story like that, write a completely original tale. Don't use something that people know and many love. Write something unique, write something different. You have these fantastic ideas. And also, I think for me, the author notes just pushed me down the road of, no, not going to bother with this. So Natasha Solomon's is a big fat no from me. I'm not going to be reading anything else, and it is going to be unshelved and rehomed in my local charity shop at a later date, especially now that I'm starting to get far more hardbacks and I need room for them on the shelf. The other book that I didn't enjoy, but actually fared better than Fair Rosaline, was The Au Pair Affair by Tessa Bailey. I am really sad to say, as I have enjoyed a lot of Tessa Bailey's, and I have quite a few of them on my shelf, The Au Pair Affair is going to be the last book that I read by her. I found certain elements of it, I'm not a prude. I would be, really am not. I've read so many books that have got a very well written love scene in them. And Bailey has done really well in the past with scenes in It Happened One Summer, Unfortunately Yours, Secretly Yours, and even Hook, Line and Sinker. I had to think for a moment, what was the sequel to It Happened One Summer? Because I preferred It Happened One Summer to Hook, Line and Sinker. And this book just didn't have the same appeal. The love scenes were actually vulgar. I didn't feel like I was watching something loving. I felt like I was watching something that that would happen between consenting but paying adults. And it made me feel very uncomfortable. So this was my farewell month to Tessa Bailey. It was also my farewell month to Ali Hazelwood. In fact, this entire quarter was my farewell to Ali Hazelwood, whose most recent publication, Not in Love, I DNF'd. So yeah, that was July. And I think it was a pretty good month. As I said, it had a very, very good book. Probably my favourite of 2024, and two books that are going to be rehomed somewhere else at a later date. Then we come to August. Following on from a really good month, I was hoping that August would be great, especially as I had a week off at the end of the month, and we actually had finally got summer weather. So I thought, perfect mood motivator. I was sitting out on the balcony. Yeah, I read 4,124 pages and 11 books. And I read a really good one and my worst read of the year. In fact, probably my worst read of a good few years, if I'm being completely honest. So I'm going to start with the high, and that was Ghost Smith by Nikki Palpretto, which is the sequel to Bonesmith, a book I enjoyed. I can't even remember if it was earlier this year or late last year. It was a fairy loot book, and so the edition is stunning, but it was a really good story. I do love a duology. I like something that is compressed into a shorter space of time. I actually love a standalone, but fantasy tends not to be that anymore. I've read a few duologies that I haven't enjoyed, Divine Rivals and the sequel, which I can't remember the title of, I didn't really enjoy that much, and they will be going bye-bye at a certain point. I think they're on the top shelf right at this moment in time, taking up a little bit of space to make things look a bit more even. but they will be going. And Ghostsmith was a fantastic ending to what I think was a brilliant mythological fantasy series. The characters were well developed, the story was well written, and it had a defined ending. There was a journey. There wasn't anything wasted in that space. They were quite chunky books, admittedly, but nothing was unnecessary. There wasn't these stupid scenes of reminds me of the Hobbit film. The Hobbit, the book by J.R.R. Tolkien, took me less time to read than the first film took me to watch, because there was none of this pensive thinking as they look out over beautiful surroundings, which I think is unnecessary. I want to get to the story when it's sold as an adventure, and that's what Ghostsmith was. It was a brilliant ending to a series that was only as long as it needed to be. So that's my top book. I think I gave it 4.25 stars. And then we get to my least favourite read for a very long time, and that was The Kingdom is a Golden Cage by Lily Inkwood. How much do I dislike thee? Let me count the ways. Far too many to actually mention. Apart from the fact that I felt the world building was lacking. In fact, there wasn't any at all. We were dumped into the middle of a story that had a huge history that we could have benefited from learning. And I don't mind having a character glossary or pronunciation index at the back of a book, but I want it to mean something. And in this book, it just didn't. There were characters mentioned that played no part in the story because they were part of the history of the book that we didn't get. And apparently the history was being published in the sequel. The whole thing, it exhausted me. And yeah, that book was a big fat no from me. And I think it was probably one of the only books I've ever said I will not recommend. And I feel quite bad about that, because I think everybody has a right to choose their own books. You should choose what you want to read, but I won't be recommending The Kingdom is a Golden Cage. Sorry. So, final month of the quarter, and that was September. I read 4,166 pages, which took my total for the quarter to 13,283, which is pretty good. And out of that, I read 11 books. So that wasn't a bad total for each book. And that took my total for the quarter to 35. I don't think that's too bad. That's almost 12 books a quarter, right? If my maths is right, my maths is awful. I am one of those people who can read for England, but my ability with maths has always been really abysmal. I apologise. I think the two, they don't always go together, because I know plenty of people who read a lot and are amazing at maths. And then there are people like me who read a lot and are rubbish at it. But everyone has a weakness. And in the reverse to July, I have 2 favourites and 1 not so favourite. The not so favourite may not come as a surprise to many of you, and I don't know if the favourites will either. So my favourites were An Almost Perfect Summer by Jill Mansell, which was an ARC copy I got, and I'm really grateful for getting it. It is a lovely end of summer tale. I read it when I was off for a weekend, sat down on the balcony in probably the last couple of days of warmth, wrapped in a blanket because it was still quite chilly, and really enjoyed this book. It was a wonderful read, really cozy, beautiful love story, but it wasn't completely focused on the love story, and I enjoyed it. And I think that's the most important thing. I gave it 5 stars. It may well go down to 4.5 at a later date when I reread it, because I will. I reread Jill Mansell quite frequently because they are kind of like Agatha Christie, a go-to comfort book. And my other top read for the month was actually a reread that I regularly pick up, and that is A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. Have to be honest, I picked this up because it was very, very soon after Maggie Smith passed away. And I'd been thinking, oh, I really want to watch that film again because Maggie Smith plays cousin Charlotte Bartlett. And I thought, oh, well, I don't fancy faffing around and playing around to plug in my Xbox so I can play a DVD. It's not going to be on it's not on any streaming platform at the moment. In fact, it never is, but it's now currently on Film 4 as I say this today. It is on Film 4 because it is a Film 4 production. But I thought, why not read the book? You haven't read it for a while. So I picked it up and I read it in an afternoon because it's not the biggest, chunkiest book, but it is a beautiful story, gorgeously written, talks about the most stunning scenery, and it makes me tear up a little bit because the love story between George and Lucy is so gentle. And I enjoy it every single time I pick it up. I see something else in the story. And it's like, oh, that's lovely. That's beautiful. Oh, that's so sweet. And they are legitimately the things I say when I pick up and read this book. So those were my two top reads for September: An Almost Perfect Summer by Jill Mansell and A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. So very, very different. And now we get to September's least favourite read, and it is probably one of the most hyped up books after ACOTAR, and that is The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. I read this, it was our selection for September's book club, and I left it really late in the day to read it because we were meeting on the 8th and I read it on about the 5th or 6th. And I can honestly say that it's not a book I'm going to continue the series. I'm not. I quite often, I will pick up a book and I try not to judge a book by its cover, and I try not to avoid a book because it is so hyped up. I read the first two in the ACOTAR series and I discarded the rest of the series because I struggled so hard to get into it, and all I kept on getting told was, oh, well, it gets better after this page. The second book is so much better. And then somebody said, oh, well, the last 200 pages of the second book are so much better. And I thought, if I have to read nearly 1,000 pages to get to something good, then I'm not going to do it because it's not my job. It's something I do for fun. I'm not doing this for my degree, as I had to read a few books, such as Dombey and Sons when I did my degree by Charles Dickens, and that is a chunky, it's very, very thick book. I am doing this because I want to. So when I picked up Pumpkin Spice Cafe, I was admittedly a little bit reluctant, but I really didn't enjoy it. I wanted to, and as I was listening to my friends who are also in the book club talking about it, I was feeling kind of resentful that I wasn't getting the same enjoyment out of it. And I don't know if it's because I was really busy and quite stressed. I'd previously read some really good books, or if it was just the fact that I simply did not like the book. It also used the poor communication trope, which I really dislike. I find it a very ineffective and frustrating trope when it comes to relationships. I don't mind the slow burn, though I wasn't a massive fan of it when Gracie Met the Grump, because that book was 611 pages and nothing happened until page 547. It was unnecessarily long. With the Pumpkin Spice Cafe, there was a lot of miscommunication, specifically between the two main characters, and I could see the twist coming a mile off. I expected that moment where he was going to see her not doing something or doing something, and he was going to leave. So I knew what was going to happen. I expected it, and that just made the book even more dull. So that was my least favourite read of September, The Pumpkin Spice Cafe. I wish I had something more positive to say about it, but I don't. So where does that leave me for my figures for the first 9 months of the year? Can't believe we are in month 10 of 2024 already. It leaves me in a really strong position. I wanted to read 92 books by the end of the year. I have surpassed that and I'm on book 111, which is fantastic. I wanted to read 40,013 pages. Yes, I am acknowledging that is a really random number. As I moved from September into October, I was getting very, very close. I had about 1,000 pages left to read. And as I speak now, I have read Polo, which is nearly 800 pages, and several other books. I'm on book 8 of the year. Book 8 of October. So I'm not doing too bad in that respect either. And I've got the entirety of the last week of the month off. So I'm going to spend quite a lot of time reading, I hope. Also doing some research and recording my videos on Rivals and finishing off An Appointment with Death, because they are two projects that have been sitting there for a while and they're looking at me as if to say, come on, you need to finish us. They are going to take a bit of time to edit, but they are things that I am looking forward to working on. So I'm in a really strong position, and I've actually now in October tipped over from my position as hovering around 39,000 pages to 42,000 pages. So I've read 3,000 pages this month already, purely because I have read some very, very chunky books. I'm looking forward to books that are not books that are coming out, though there are a few. I've got Quicksilver on order, and also the sequel to the Hurricane Wars, though I wasn't a massive fan of that book. I want to find out where the book goes. I think that Thea Guanzon has great promise, and I'm hoping that this second book is going to really delve into the story far more, and it's not going to be a will they, won't they, because they are already married. Sorry for the spoiler. For the first book, not the second. I haven't read that yet. So I've got those two arriving in December, and I've got 5 books arriving in October, none of which at this moment in time I can remember, apart from the sequel to a Kerry Maniscalco, The Throne of Secrets, that I haven't read the first one yet. So it's going to be added to the shelf purely because I wanted a matching set. And then I will read both of those in the new year. At the moment, I have my eye on The Bell Witches, which arrived midway through last month or the very beginning of this month, by Lindsay Kelk. That one is one that I've been looking forward to for a while, because I do like Kelk's writing. And then I've got Passenger to Frankfurt by Agatha Christie on my shelf to read. It is our November book club read. And I'm also got Somewhere Beyond the Sea by TJ Klune to finally pick up and read through at some point in the next couple of months. I'm not going to put any pressure on myself. I have surpassed the targets that I set, but I don't think that that is the be all and end all of everything. I think that sometimes I put too much stock in how many pages, how many books, and I've got to stop doing that, because ultimately, if I'm reading something I don't enjoy, I don't want to put pressure on myself to continue reading it, when really it should be a case of move on. Because you can't read everything, and you can't like everything either. I think that's what I've taken away from this year, is that you can't like everything. Last year I DNF'd one single book, and that was Dragonfall. This year I have DNF'd a few more, and it's getting slightly easier. I'm not someone who finds it really easy to DNF a book. So when I do, it's a massive thing. I have a number of books on the shelf that I really do want to have a look at, especially things like The Phoenix Keeper. I also really, in my heart of hearts, I don't want to leave my 24 for 24 unfinished. And as you will see from up here, I still have 7 books to read on that list. And there's only 2.5, well, not even 2.5 months left of the year. So I've got to get a move on with those books if I want to hit my goal for that. And obviously I also have quite a few books left in my 1-star review jar, but this is probably going to continue on into 2025 when I also decide my 25 for 25. In fact, I might use some of these to help decide that as well, because that has been a really good way for me this year to get through a few more of the books on my TBR, which keeps on growing. In fact, I've ordered books that are coming out in September 2025. So yeah, I'm getting prepared for next year's TBR to continue growing ever more. Anyway, I figured that this was as good a time as any to talk about the last 3 months, talk about a few books that I'm going to be looking at in the next few months. And until next time and my next video, thanks for listening. Bye.